Hello and welcome to this week's IG Live. Today I have the absolute honor of talking to award-winning author and illustrator Lulu Delacre. Of course, I'm sure everybody knows her work, but we are going to be talking specifically about her latest book, which is unfortunately, the final book in the beloved series. And we are going to be talking to her about that and why it's so important to have Rico. So be sure to stay tuned, and thank you all for all your support that allows us to do these interviews every week. Today's a double header. We actually have a second one after that, so stay tuned. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm delighted to join you in my first Instagram Live.
I can't believe it because you are so savvy at social media, so I'm very honored to be the first one.
No, to tell the truth, that is truly a compliment, but it's not true because I am still learning. I did not grow up with this, so it's a learning experience.
Well, you do an amazing job with it, so thank you for being here. And I feel like everybody watching already knows you and is familiar with your work, but maybe just for those who don't, introduce yourself and tell us, what was your journey to becoming an author illustrator? Is that something you always wanted to do?
Well, I always wanted to become an artist. What kind of artist? In art school, I discovered that there was such a thing as picture books. I had no idea that that genre existed growing up in the island of Puerto Rico. No public libraries, no access to picture books whatsoever. Very few children's books, if any, in my own school. So it wasn't until I was in art school I discovered the genre, and I fell in love with it. And I would say that to do this very fast forward, in 1980, I graduated from art school in 80. It was in 84 that I published the first book that I was both author and illustrator of. And in 1989, that's the year that I began the series of books that I truly love, which are books that celebrate my heritage, with this book that is now Arroz con leche it turned already 36 years in print, which is kind of amazing because when it was published, it was a non-mainstream book.
Well, I'm so glad you did, because I think for so many of us, I'm hopefully things are better now. I think there are becoming more and more books available. But I know when my kids were little, which was not that long ago, my oldest is 15, still I felt like you really had to search out these books, and yours are the ones that we always went to because that was what we were looking for. And I've heard you say that you say the measure of your success, or the success of your books, is the pride you see on the faces of Latino children when they see their classmates enjoying their heritage and their language. Can you talk more about what impact your books have?
That's a really good question. I will say that to answer that question, there are three moments that sparkle in my brain, three memories that sparkle. The first one goes back to 1989 when Arroz con leche was published. I had just my brand new copy and I was doing an author visit. And, back then, a young person as I was, I held hands with kids after explaining about the book and did the Arroz con leche game song. And when I did that, there was this one boy who was really, truly engaged. And after I had finished the session, the teacher told me that the boy had come to her and he wanted to know where he could have the book. But she also mentioned that the child, according to her, he was a problem boy. So that struck me, a problem boy. And when later in the office, I asked to see him and I met him in the office. I introduced myself. We talked a little bit. He told me how the book had really touched him because he could listen to his mother's in his brain when we were singing, that those were the songs that his mother sang to him. So of course, right then and there, I gave him the only copy that I had of my brand new published book. But Ramon was his name. Always, his name was really imprinted in my brain and became the name of a book that I later created of the main character of the book. Ramon is the main character of the Gigante Masquerader, another picture book that I published later. But that's one instance. Another one that I would say really sparkles, middle of the 90s, mid 90s, I would say. I was again doing author visits, and I was having lunch with Spanish-speaking kids. Sometimes school, the media specialist or the organizer arranges these lunches for me to either share with young writers and authors or with Latino kids. And I was having lunch with them, and of course I started speaking in Spanish, and all these kids totally opened up, and they were just so comfortable and chatting here and that and exchanging. Again, the media specialist later told me that she had never seen these children so engaged. So, and of course that's along the lines, every time that you go to schools and I start by asking the question, how many here speak Spanish at home? And I ask the question in Spanish, and many times you have many hands go up, and then I ask the countries these children come from, or rather their families. And I love to see the pride of the faces of these kids when all of a sudden Spanish is acknowledged and it's not a second language anymore, and the person in front of them speaks Spanish like them, and oh boy, maybe I could be like an author and illustrator of children's books. So all these connections, last instances will be the fourth, books, the books that I do enable kids, like in second grade in Boston, to literally get so excited, and this comes to about the Rafi and Rosi books, to write persuasive letters to my publisher in order to request more adventures of Rafi and Rosi. And I needed to say this because if it hadn't been for these kids, I don't think the fifth book of Rafi and Rosi would have ever been published. So I tell you, that's what happens when you do a writing that touches, that actually, kids connect with. So I hope that has answered a longer answer that you probably thought of.
No, this is amazing, because one thing that strikes me is, your books obviously connect with them because of the characters, and they have so much pride because it showcases their heritage, but also to see you as an author and an illustrator, like you say, that they think, wow, this is someone who speaks my language, who knows where I'm from, that they can see themselves maybe following a similar path. Oh, and you've got a lovely comment. We love Rafi and Rosi. Thank you for that. Yes, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be sad to know this is the final book.
Yes, it is. Actually, it is. And I'll tell you why it is. I'm going to tell you why. The reason why it is the final book is because my editor of all the books retired, and I literally took her out of retirement to do the final Rafi and Rosi book, and to dovetail into perhaps what other attendees are thinking of. These books, I wanted to share the culture of the island, and the first book, Rafi and Rosi, talks about nature, bioluminescence, the sand, there's science experiments. But all the series is really about the sibling relationship. And that's really what matters in this series. Because this relationship, how Rafi behaves with Rosi and Rosi behaves with Rafi, this back and forth is really rooted in a true sibling relationship. And if I may be truthful with you, is actually based on my husband's relationship with his younger sibling. And there are things that happen in the story that go back to decades ago. So I've used that in order to infuse this relationship with a very authentic sibling back and forth. And I know it's working because kids write to me. They really connect. When I go to schools and high school, well, how many of you have ever been have younger siblings and never told the younger siblings, oh, no, you cannot do that because you're too little, or boast about doing this and that because you're the oldest one, or because you know more things because of course you are 5 years older, so you are bound to know more things than your 5-year younger sister, right? And and so many kids raise their hands. Yes, of course, they can see themselves in that relationship. And how many young sisters are, Rosi, as a younger sister, very in awe of her brother, of her older brother, but at the same time with a mind of her own. And she teaches lessons to Rafi, and I adore that shit, that she stands her ground. Sometimes she's the one, the problem solver. Even though she's little, she comes up with creative solutions. And this back and forth into the relationship and the abiding love of one another is what grounds the books. Then, of course, on top of that, you have all the culture that enriches the stories. So,
well, Frances here says that she used the Rafi and Rosi books to introduce her son to Puerto Rico and Spanish language over 13 years ago. Sad to hear that you published the last book in the series, although we'll get to it later, maybe what you have coming out. Maybe that'll help people feel a little better about what other books you have coming next. But before we get to that, we need to talk about the final book, because we've been talking kind of about the series in general, but tell us about the new book, Menú, and what was the inspiration behind it?
Well, I had, since it was going to be the closing title, and I had already talked about nature with Rafi and Rosi. I had talked about traditions. I mean, I had touched on traditions because there are so many traditions in the island of Puerto Rico, but with Carnival, the Carnival of Ponce specifically in Carnival. I had talked about history, again, just, a little bit of history in Pirates. And did you know that Cofresi is the last pirate of the Caribbean, and he's actually from Puerto Rico. So, and I had talked about the amazing richness of the music in the island, which is really fabulous, bomba, plena, salsa. And in doing so, well, what's left, if I was going to pick a subject, what would that be? Let me go back to that class in Boston Public Schools. I was told with several ideas, and we were having these conversations with second graders. And I said, well, what is the next adventure that you would like to see about Rafi and Rosi? And actually, they made drawings of their suggestions. But in this conversation that I had with these kids, I said, well, what do you think about food? And they go, oh, yes. And their faces brighten up. I said, okay. So do you think what, tostones? Do you think arañitas? Do you think pastelas? Do you think what, guava shells and syrup? Oh, my God. And they were just all excited about food. So, okay, this is it, decided. We decided right then and there. The last theme I was going to touch was food. Because indeed, food is really a window to so many cultures. I mean, through food, through language, you get to know a culture. And I needed to touch on that before closing this series. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's the last one, but it's a delicious one.
And I should say, for anybody that hasn't looked at Lulu's Instagram feed, you really should, because there are a lot. I know there's one where I think you're making arañitas, and just yes. all the difficult research you had to do for this book to try not only.
And it's true, and you bring a point that is very valid, and that is that for all my books, even when it's fiction, even with these are beginner readers, for goodness sake, beginner readers, and I spent tons of time doing this research for them. Why? Because that is really what the good story, the background of that story. These are the bones. The research of the story. I have my characters, I may have my setting, but the research really grounds the story. And in Menú, the story it is actually the first book where not in every single book I have 3 stories, and each one is an adventure, and each adventure stands on its own. This is because I made an exception for Menú, because again, it is the closing title. This is a longer narrative in the sense that in the beginning, I mean, the goal for these siblings is to go to visit Abuela, who lives in La Ruta del Lechón in Guabate, in the mountains of Puerto Rico, and help her make, help her assemble 60 pasteles for an order. She makes this for a living. So they go there, and if you have never made pasteles puertorriqueños is a time-involving endeavor. And that is why even in the island, if you can, you'll buy them from somebody who makes them, because otherwise you're going to spend hours and hours and hours on doing them on your own. Going back to the origin of this story, as you, the same way that when I left the island, I could listen to the lullaby of El Coqui at night, even though I wasn't in the island. And I miss that lullaby. And that's the birth of Rafi and Rosi in a sketchbook. The same way, I miss the pasteles puertorriqueños here in the US, and not going to the island every single Christmas. 21 years ago, I decided to start a pasteles making party. And I've been tweaking that recipe for 21 years. Wow. Because pasteles is not a set in stone recipe. There is a traditional way of making them. And one of my relatives, whose grandmother taught him how to make them, he made them with his grandmother. He came with 21 years ago, and he literally taught me the method of his grandma. And then from then on, we've been tweaking this recipe, here and there, until in this last year, everybody said these are the best ever. So, it's a recipe 21 years in the making. And what is beautiful is that I transfer that. This is the basis of the story. The Rafi and Rosi go to Guabate to help Abuela. And of course, like always, they encounter challenges they need to overcome. They have all these adventures that they solve on their own, because these are very creative young siblings here. And they finally help Abuela make I'm not going to reveal the whole stories, but they help Abuela accomplish her goal. And at the end, I reveal the recipes as well. And I will say that because some of my friends throughout the year have turned vegan, I have a vegan version of the pasteles, which, to tell you the truth, personally, I like better. So, it is interesting. You grew up with pork and end up like the vegan version. And I'll tell you, I think I got it really, really good. So.
I love that. And I mean, with so many of your books, this series offers a really authentic, joyful representation of Puerto Rican culture. Why is that so important to have for young people?
Well, I think that in everything that an author writes, I think it's important that it is authentic. And being authentic is actually being true to your heritage and your roots. It's writing about what you've experienced. And that is what really brings about the best stories. If you try to write about something that you've never experienced, first, you're going to have to do like tons of research. And second, it might not come as authentic. I can tell when somebody has written something and this person is not from the culture and there are gaps. It's just like the one word that is not properly used, is the detail that is missing. You can tell. Somebody from the culture can tell. So for me, it is very important what I do. I know that when I'm writing these Rafi and Rosi books, I know that if I laugh, they're good. Kids are gonna laugh. And I only laugh at things that make sense, that they're authentic. If when writing a book, a story is authentic, the reader relates to it. It's almost like it comes to the surface, not even you wanting it to, but it comes, that fact comes to the surface. And I think it's important. So
I'm curious, just because, you've written so many books, and a lot of them are quite different. I mean, here you have Rafi and Rosi about, these, the early readers, that's fiction, and then you have others that, let's see, you have myths and legends and folk tales. You also have, like the one on Sonia Sotomayor, Turning Pages.
Turning pages.
There's so many different, not just that you've written so much, but they're all quite different from each other, different genres. So I'm curious, is there one that either you feel like you get most recognized for, or maybe one that was a special for you?
Well, that's a two-part question.
Yes.
I will say that, three-part question. I will say that if I were to be known by just one book, I say that Arroz con leche is one book that has made me proud, because the fact that it was published when the publisher thought that it would never, the publisher was doing, Scholastic was doing this as a favor to the Latino community. The book is still in print, and I'm still getting royalties. And the book, why? Because back then, mothers would get the book in their hands and literally start singing, Arroz con leche se quiere casar con una viudita de la capital. So these folk songs, this oral tradition has survived many centuries. So this is a book that fills me with pride in that sense. It's a long-lasting. It has gotten to be a classic when it was never meant to be a classic, at least for the publisher. And that's thanks to the readers. And so that would be one book. Turning Pages, of course, was such an honor to be called by this editor out of the blue and be asked to illustrate the Supreme Court, Sonia Sotomayor's autobiography for children as Supreme Court Justice. I mean, for me, that was a total amazing thing. And I remember asking, my husband almost killed me, but I asked, why me? Because, and then the next question is, yes, but I want to interview her. And when I hung up, the editor said, well, I'm going to have to see whether that can be arranged. And my husband almost killed me again. Because, are you crazy? Asking for an interview. But I truly believe that the interviews really enrich the illustration. So that book, fills me with pride from the sense of having been able to do something for somebody that is such a wise person and who is an example for so many children. And it was a joy, an honor, and a truly amazing experience to be able to spend 6 hours in chambers reviewing photo albums of the justice. So that was quite the experience. And then the last book, and I will not say that these are in order, but the book that is really closer to my heart, many people do not know, and it's a book titled Alicia After Image. And it is not because it's a book that has sold tons, because it hasn't. It's a book that touches those who need it. And it's a memoir of my daughter, Alicia Maria. And is her life seen through the eyes of her friends. She passed when she was 16. And I interviewed many of her friends trying to understand teen grief. Out of these interviews, this book, this memoir came out. And it's a beautiful book that really touches teens that truly need that solace. Teen grief is very different. But this is a book that very few people know about. So I've told you about 3.
Well, and just to wrap up, maybe that was kind of our look back. What is coming next for you?
Okay,
I know
sometimes next.
You can't say anything, I mean, depending on what stage they're in. So what can you tell us?
Well, I've lost all fear. So I like I said to everybody, at my age, I've lost all fear. So if it happens, if it happens. If it doesn't happen, it wasn't meant to be. I'm loving the research that I'm doing, and spend now about a year doing the research on this another nonfiction book, a picture book at the crossroads of Latin and picture books and STEM, Latinx and STEM, and it treats very much as Olinguito. I don't know if you can see it, perhaps not. Olinguito from A to Z, Unveiling the Cloud Forest, and Cool Green over the Fresco, amazing, remarkable trees. So it's nonfiction seen through a Latino lens. And this one deals, I will say that in the title, you will have 1491. That gives you already a little bit of an inkling of what it's going to be about. And it's a bird's eye view of the glorious gardens that existed, that blanketed the lands that we today call Latin America at that time. And the crops that four native cultures, or the foods that four native cultures gifted us, and that today form more than half the crops that the world depend on. And that's a fact that I don't know many readers know about. And I am not going to say more, but you may imagine that corn, chocolate, and yuca or cassava, and let me see, and well, there are many more. Many others are included. And the potato are included in these. Many, very long list. I'm a gardener. Besides being a cook, I'm a gardener, and that's a love of mine. And so I've been toying with this idea since 2015.
That's amazing, especially as someone who loves history. But for anybody that, I like you say, I think that's something not a lot of people think about, especially something that's so common like chocolate or the potato that we're so used to having. I think the tomato also, that
tomato
in some ways is kind of part of, say, European cuisine. It's just so ubiquitous. I don't think people stop to think about where it actually came from and how much we have to be grateful for.
Absolutely. Actually, not long ago, I was in Rwanda, and they served me a dish with Irish potatoes. And I go, well, do you know that potatoes are not from Ireland? Do you know that the origin of the potato is actually Peru? So,
wow, Irish potatoes. I suppose to distinguish them from yams, that they would call them or sweet potatoes. Interesting.
I don't know, but it is interesting, the misconceptions of the crops, the products that we eat daily, and that are in so many of the foods that kids today here in the US and anywhere take for granted. And they don't know who were the native cultures that some of them for 8,000 years developed certain species. And that is truly fascinating. So that is a story that needs to be told. I find it fascinating. And I'm going to fill the picture book with facts that kids are going to go, oh, wow, I didn't know this.
Yeah. I love it. And when it comes out, we'll be sure to share about it in our stories for our readers as well. Thank you so much for joining. This is such a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you. Gracias.
And thanks to all of you for watching. As always, this will be up in a few minutes on Instagram and later on our YouTube channel. Bye, everybody.